The Galactic Council Hall was a place of order, diplomacy, and long debates that often stretched for days without conclusion. Representatives from hundreds of alien species sat in their designated seats, each one representing a different world, a different empire, or a different ideology. The hall itself was a masterpiece of advanced engineering, a massive circular chamber floating in deep space, illuminated by artificial starlight. It was the center of all galactic politics, the place where wars were prevented, alliances were forged, and sometimes grudges simmered for centuries. On this particular day, everything was normal. The council was discussing trade routes, border disputes, and the ever-present issue of the HFY pirate raids in the outer sectors. Boredom hung in the air like a thick fog, as ambassadors repeated the same arguments they had been making for decades. And then, without warning, the alarms blared. A shrill, piercing sound that had not been heard in centuries. Every screen in the chamber flashed red, displaying a message that sent a shiver through even the most battle-hardened warriors. Present UNKNO double, UNWARSHIPDT, CTT, TT, HIGHTHREA, TLAVEL, IMMEDIATERES, PO and SEREQUIRED. The entire hall fell into stunned silence. The words high threat level were never used lightly. For a moment, no one spoke, as if their collective minds struggled to process what had just happened. Then, chaos erupted. Representatives shouted over one another, demanding information. The security officers standing at the edges of the chamber instinctively placed their hands on their weapons. The holographic display at the center of the hall flickered to life, projecting a massive black warship emerging from the depths of space. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its size alone was terrifying, several times larger than the most powerful Draxian dreadnoughts. Its surface was sleek, smooth, and ominous, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. But what truly sent waves of fear through the council was its energy readings. The ship was radiating power on a level that should have been impossible. Weapons of unknown design lined its hull, and its shields registered at strengths beyond any known technology. "Identify the vessel!" demanded Supreme Chancellor Vokran, his voice laced with rare urgency. His species, the Ultheri, were known for their emotionless demeanor, but even he looked unnerved. A team of analysts scrambled to comply, their tentacle-like fingers gliding over control panels. We have a partial identification," one of them stammered. It's human." The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silent. A deep, dreadful quiet. Humanity. A name that was rarely spoken in the Galactic Council. A species that had been dismissed long ago, considered primitive, insignificant, and unworthy of membership. For centuries, humans had remained isolated on the edges of the known galaxy, barely stepping beyond their own solar system. Most had assumed they would either destroy themselves or fade into irrelevance. But now, here they were, and they had arrived with a warship that dwarfed anything in the Council's combined fleets. "Impossible," muttered the Krogan warlord, his thick, armored hide glistening with sweat. "Humans do not possess this level of technology. They are not supposed to be a threat." "And yet," whispered a Seraphian diplomat, her golden eyes locked onto the warship, "they are here." A heavy tension settled over the room. No one knew what to do. If it had been any other unknown species, the Council would have assumed it was a misunderstanding. They would have opened diplomatic channels, offered peaceful negotiations. But this was different. This was a species that had been overlooked, underestimated, and now they had returned with something that no one could explain. "Are they broadcasting any messages?" Vokran asked, trying to regain control of the situation. The analysts checked their monitors. "Negative," came the reply. "They are holding position just outside the orbital defense perimeter. No transmissions, no response to hails." That made the situation even more unsettling. A warship of that magnitude could obliterate entire fleets, yet it was simply sitting there, watching, waiting. "Prepare defensive formations," Vokran ordered. "Do not fire unless provoked, but I want every fleet on high alert." The command was relayed instantly, and across the Council's many star systems, fleets scrambled into action. Warships powered up their weapons, fighters launched from carriers, and defense stations locked onto the mysterious human vessel. The galaxy had never taken humans seriously before. But now, it seemed, the humans were ready to be taken very seriously indeed. The question was, had they come as conquerors or something far worse? The Galactic Council Hall was still echoing with hurried discussions and nervous whispers when the alarm blared again, this time louder, more urgent, as if the entire galaxy itself was screaming in warning. The holographic display flickered violently, and then it changed no longer a simple threat alert, but a live feed from the defense monitoring station orbiting the Council's space. Every diplomat, every commander, every security officer in the chamber turned their eyes toward the massive central screen, and at that moment, a collective gasp rippled through the hall. A warship had appeared. It hadn't come through a known hyperlane, nor had any jump signatures been detected. There was no warning, no distortion in space before its arrival. It was just suddenly there, a massive, dark behemoth floating in the void, like a nightmare pulled from the depths of the unknown. It did not belong to any known species. It had no markings, no insignias, no signs of allegiance. It was not sleek and elegant like the Seraphian ships, nor was it jagged and predatory like the Krogan war fleets. Its surface was smooth, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been carved from a single, perfect piece of some alien metal. But the most terrifying thing was the energy signature, an overwhelming, impossible level of power radiating from its core, fluctuating like a living thing, warping the space around it in subtle waves. Every ship in the defense perimeter immediately locked onto the unknown warship, their targeting system struggling to process its exact dimensions. It was huge, far larger than any known dreadnought in the galaxy, a size that should have been impossible to sustain in real combat, yet it floated effortlessly, undisturbed, like a silent executioner waiting for its sentence to be delivered. Where did it come from? Chancellor Vokran's voice was calm, but his claws were gripping the edge of his seat with such force that cracks began to form in the polished stone. The analysts at the control stations were pale, their eyes darting across the screens in disbelief. "Unknown," one of them whispered. There were no FTL signatures, no jump disturbances. One moment there was nothing, and then it was just there. The word sent a chill through the chamber. No ship, no matter how advanced, could enter a system without some kind of traceable arrival. But this ship had defied that logic. "Are they transmitting anything?" Vokran asked. Another nervous shake of the head. No signals. No hails. Nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Every second that passed felt like an eternity as the Galactic Council stared at the warship floating just outside their defense grid. It was close enough that they could see it from the observation decks, a massive shadow blocking out the stars, its smooth black hull absorbing light rather than reflecting it. And then something changed. The warship moved. It was subtle at first, a slow, deliberate shift in its position, but the moment it happened, every fleet admiral in the system tensed, their fingers hovering over the command consoles. It was impossible to predict its propulsion system, no visible thrusters, no conventional ion trails, yet it glided through space with an unnatural grace, coming to a slow, deliberate stop just beyond the reach of the planetary defense grid. And then it turned. Not chaotically. Not like a drifting vessel. It turned with absolute calculated precision, its massive front aligning perfectly with the Galactic Council station. It was looking directly at them. It knew they were watching. The realization sent a ripple of fear through the chamber. The warship wasn't just some rogue vessel that had stumbled upon their territory by accident. It had come deliberately. It had positioned itself deliberately. And now it was waiting. Supreme Chancellor Vokran's voice was sharp and immediate. "All fleets, hold position. Do not engage unless fired upon." Across the system, the vast armadas of the Galactic Council adjusted their formations, battleships moving into defensive positions, fighter squadrons launching in controlled patterns. Every weapon was primed, every crew prepared for the possibility of war. And still, the warship did nothing. It just stayed there, like a predator staring at its prey, letting the fear settle, letting the tension rise to its peak. "Can we get a deeper scan?" Vokran demanded. "We need to know who built that thing." The analysts scrambled, redirecting every available scanner toward the warship. Within moments, the results began pouring in, and what they found made even the most battle-hardened commanders freeze in their seats. This can't be right," one of the technicians stammered. "The readings are impossible." "Explain," Vokran ordered, his voice dangerously low. The analyst swallowed hard before speaking. "The ship's energy output is off the charts. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. The hull our scans can't penetrate it. No known material matches its density. And its weapon systems." He stopped mid-sentence, his voice caught in his throat. "What about its weapons?" The analyst hesitated. Then, with visible effort, he forced the words out. "It has enough firepower to destroy this entire system." Silence. A deep, soul-crushing silence. The reality of the situation settled upon the chamber like a suffocating weight. This was not a normal warship. This was something beyond the Galactic Council's understanding. It was not an invader. It was not an explorer. It was something else. And yet, despite its overwhelming power, it had not attacked. It had not made any hostile moves. It was waiting. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Some of them, the younger and more ambitious diplomats, saw an opportunity. Perhaps this ship could be reasoned with. Perhaps an alliance could be formed. Others, the seasoned warriors who had seen countless battles, recognized something far more terrifying. This was not diplomacy. This was a test. The unknown warship was waiting to see how the galaxy would react. And that meant only one thing: the true threat had not yet begun. The Galactic Council Hall, a place of order and control, had turned into a scene of pure chaos. The moment the warship appeared, the carefully maintained diplomacy of the galaxy crumbled under the weight of uncertainty and fear. Council members shouted over one another, their voices filled with panic and disbelief. Some demanded immediate military action, their instincts telling them that something so massive, so unknown, could only be a threat. Others insisted on caution, warning that any aggressive move could provoke an enemy they did not understand. The security officers stationed around the hall gripped their weapons, their training failing to prepare them for a situation like this. No one knew where the ship had come from, how it had arrived without detection, or, most importantly, who had sent it. The absence of an answer was more terrifying than any known enemy. The galaxy had its fair share of warlords, conquerors, and power-hungry empires, but nothing, absolutely nothing, matched what they were seeing. The warship's unnatural silence only made things worse. It did not respond to hails, did not attempt to communicate, did not make any move that could be interpreted as hostile or peaceful. It simply waited, positioned like a hunter watching its prey. The council chamber's massive holographic display zoomed in, showing the ship's sleek, unmarked hull, the smooth surface giving away nothing about its origins. Every known empire had a distinct design language when it came to warships. But this vessel? It was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Its energy readings were still fluctuating beyond measurable limits, suggesting technology so advanced that even the most powerful races in the galaxy couldn't comprehend it. The realization sent a cold wave of dread through every leader present. This was not just another military power. This was something else. Chancellor Vokran slammed his clawed hand on the table, his patience reaching its limit. "We need answers," he growled, his deep voice silencing the room for a moment. His reptilian features were twisted in frustration, his sharp golden eyes scanning the terrified faces around him. "If we do not know where it came from, then we must find out who sent it." The analysts worked at their stations, their fingers moving frantically over their interfaces, searching for any clue, any anomaly in past records that could explain this warship's existence. Data streams filled the air, pages of information scrolling too fast for the untrained eye to follow. Then, A technician's voice broke through the tension, a voice filled with disbelief and fear. "Chancellor, we have something." Every head in the room turned toward him. His hands were shaking as he projected a distorted signal onto the central display. It was fragmented, almost like an echo of a transmission long lost in time, but one detail sent shockwaves through the entire chamber. The language was human. A suffocating silence settled over the council. No one spoke. No one moved. Humanity, a species that had been ignored for centuries. A species that the great empires of the galaxy had dismissed as insignificant, primitive, and unworthy of consideration. They were barely even acknowledged as a part of the galactic community, their presence limited to minor colonies on the fringes of known space. Most council members had not even met a human in their lifetimes. And yet, here it was, a human warship, appearing out of nowhere, carrying power that defied every known law of physics, staring down the greatest powers of the galaxy without fear. "This is a mistake," one ambassador whispered, his voice trembling. "Humans do not have this kind of technology. They should not have this kind of technology." And yet, they did. The evidence was undeniable. The warship, the signal, the eerie silence, it all pointed to one unthinkable truth. Humanity, the species that had been ignored, underestimated, and forgotten, had returned. But why? And how had they built something so far beyond anything the rest of the galaxy possessed? "Have we miscalculated?" Supreme Admiral Krennis muttered, his normally composed expression betraying a flicker of unease. "Did we misunderstand their potential?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. If humanity had somehow achieved this level of technology and secrecy, without the galaxy's notice, then what else were they hiding? If they had come to make a statement, then what was the message? No one had an answer, and the ship, that monstrous, silent warship, was still waiting. The fear in the room deepened. The great empires of the galaxy were no strangers to war, but this was different. This was not a fleet invasion. This was not a display of brute force. This was a warning. The warship did not need reinforcements. It did not need to fire a single shot. It had already sent its message loud and clear. Humanity was no longer weak. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council faced a foe they did not understand. And the worst part? Humanity had not even spoken yet. The control room was suffocating under the weight of silence. The analysts, officers, and diplomats all stood frozen, staring at the data flashing across their holographic screens. It was impossible. It was wrong. The calculations were repeated over and over, but the answer remained the same. The warship was human. Chancellor Vokran's claws gripped the edge of the command table, his breathing slow and controlled, but his mind was racing with disbelief. "Check again," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. The analysts hesitated, their fingers trembling over their consoles. They had already checked, double-checked, and triple-checked. The readings didn't change. The massive, silent warship floating just outside their planetary defense grid was of human origin. The words burned in their minds, defying every expectation, every belief about the fragile, insignificant species that had once been dismissed as barely capable of interstellar travel. But the truth was undeniable. The molecular composition of the hull contained traces of Earth-based alloys. The energy core, though far more advanced than anything on record, bore similarities to primitive fusion designs first developed on humanity's homeworld. The artificial intelligence signatures embedded in the ship's network had unmistakable patterns of human coding. Every layer of the scan, every piece of data confirmed it. This was a human vessel, and yet it was beyond anything the Galactic Council had ever encountered. The level of technology was incomprehensible, decades, perhaps centuries ahead of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. This shouldn't be possible, one of the senior technicians whispered, his eyes wide with shock. Humanity was still struggling with basic FTL routes the last time we evaluated them. They didn't have the resources, the knowledge, or the means to build something like this. But they had. Somehow, somewhere, humanity had evolved beyond their supposed limitations. They had done it in complete secrecy, beyond the watchful eyes of the Council, beyond the reach of spies, beyond the reach of the great empires that believed themselves to be the rulers of the stars. And now, without warning, without declaration, without introduction, they had returned. "This changes everything," Supreme Admiral Krennis muttered, his voice filled with something dangerous and emotion unfamiliar to the galactic elite. It was fear. The implications were too vast, too disturbing to fully process. How had they advanced so far, so quickly? How had an underdeveloped race, once considered irrelevant? And, most importantly, why had they brought it here? The warship remained motionless, a silent monolith against the backdrop of space. No signals, no communications, no hostile movements. Just an impossible presence watching them, waiting for them to react. The entire defense fleet had its weapons locked on the unknown vessel, but deep down, every commander knew the truth. Their weapons meant nothing. The warship's energy readings were unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't just powerful, it was beyond measurement. It didn't fit into any known classifications of military power. It was something new, something greater. Chancellor Vokran turned to his advisors, his sharp golden eyes scanning the nervous faces of those who had ruled the galaxy for centuries. "We need to make a decision," he said coldly. "Do we open communications? Or do we prepare for war?" The words sent a fresh wave of unease through the council members. War? Against an enemy they did not understand? Against a force that had already proven itself to be so far ahead of them that conventional battle strategies were meaningless? If they wanted war, one of the admirals whispered, we would already be dead. The room went still. It was true. The warship had positioned itself perfectly within striking range of the Council's most valuable station. It could have fired the moment it arrived. It could have devastated the entire planetary system. But it hadn't. It was waiting for them to make the first move. And that made it even more terrifying. "Open a channel," Vokran finally ordered, his voice steady. The communication officer scrambled to comply, activating every frequency, sending diplomatic codes, waiting, praying for a response. The seconds stretched into eternity. And then the warship answered. The massive holographic display flickered as a signal was received. The transmission was audio only, a single voice breaking through the silence, carried across the vast emptiness of space. It was deep, controlled, filled with an emotion that sent chills through every being in the room. "We are human." The voice was calm. It was not a boast. It was not a threat. It was a statement, a fact, a reality that the galaxy was now forced to accept. And in that moment, everything changed.